Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Safe Room. It is your host, Sean Williams. I am back with another episode. And today, I wouldn't say this is going to be a serious one because, again, I don't want to make it too serious. You know, I like to bring a lot of energy to my episodes, but I want to talk about National Indigenous History Month and everything that has been happening recently, especially with the residential schools incident. And I have two wonderful guests with me today. First off, um, I had her as a teacher back at Downie Secondary School, and it's been a little while, and I'm really glad that she's here on the podcast today. I would like to welcome Lisa Prinn, or as most of the Downie folks remember, Miss Prinn.
Hi, Sean. Thanks so much for having me on. It's a real pleasure to see you again and to be invited onto this podcast. It's been a really emotional few weeks, and it's an important conversation to have.
Yes.
Would you like me to introduce myself officially?
I mean, you can go a little bit about yourself. You know, what do you do?
Sure. So I am non-Indigenous. My mom's side, we're seventh or eighth generation settler Canadians. And then on my dad's side, he was from New Zealand. So he was a newcomer who came here from New Zealand when he was 16. I am no longer a teacher at Downsview or a teacher with the TDSB, actually. I now manage the education and activation for the Gord, Downie, and Chanie Wenjack Fund, heading up the National Legacy Schools program. So it's very different. I do miss being in the classroom with students like Sean, who was such a great student, but yeah, I've moved on. And this is my colleague, Rebecca.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Rebecca Hope. I am the program assistant to the Legacy Schools program, which Lisa manages. I am Algonquin First Nations and Irish. And this is such an important conversation, and it's been something that's been on my mind since the discovery of the 215 children's remains were discovered in Kamloops. And so very happy to be here today and to be part of this conversation.
Yeah, thank you guys for coming on, and this is a very serious issue. And I just kind of want to start off just giving my personal take. I think one thing I could say, I really appreciate how a lot of people are now starting to come to the light of the issues, especially what happened in Kamloops. It was just such a travesty to hear, but it also got me thinking about this has been more than just like what's happened in the last couple of weeks. This has been going on for a very long period. And it just makes me curious about how is it just now something like this is taken within the issue to be like, oh, okay, we acknowledge this and we need to address it or talk about it more. So I just kind of want to like ask you guys the question, like, how do you feel when people are starting to like, bring up the conversation about what's happening and they're trying to understand more about what's happening? Do you feel like it's in your, I guess, your right or your just moral right to kind of step in and be that person that's just educating them or led them what's going on? Or do you feel like there's that side of you, it's like, I'm trying to just see what other people are saying and just trying to lean back and keep myself reserved? I mean, this goes out to one of you two.
Oh, wow. That's a loaded question. I think, first of all, I think it's good that people are talking about it, no matter if they're coming to honestly discover what's happened at residential schools for the first time, or if they're an Indigenous generational survivor or one of their parents were in residential schools. It's good to talk about because this is, the Indigenous people that were affected by residential schools, like, they're still here. This is an issue of today. It's not just an issue of were murdered. It's an issue of today. There's still, prisons are filled with Indigenous people, and there's also like the child welfare system, which is primarily Indigenous children taken away from their families. It's residential schools in a different form. So it's so important to talk about the issues. I don't know, it struck me particularly hard. So I've been I have things to say. So I'm not sitting back and watching what other people say first, but I'm sitting with myself to figure out what it is that I can contribute to the conversation that will actually make a difference. Like, I don't want to just say something to be heard. I want to actually say something that can make an impact. So, like, as an Indigenous person, I feel like there's a lot of people that won't be saying things right now. They might have to take a step back and mourn and grieve, and to expect every Indigenous person to be posting or to be talking about it as like to educate other people isn't, I don't think that would be the right take, because there's so much trauma Indigenous people have endured, and you need to give them space to heal. However, there are a lot of Indigenous people contributing to the conversation on social media platforms, like Shayla Stonechild. She's a really great example, or Marika Masala. And so there's a lot of people you can watch online that can give you a lot of insight, for the time being, but respecting Indigenous voices and also the time it takes for Indigenous people to be able to contribute would be, I would say, something everyone should keep in mind at this time.
I think too, from a non-Indigenous perspective, I mean, the TRC's calls to action 4 years ago, the testimonials were there. Anyone who'd read those testimonials or was aware of the calls to action knew that this was coming, and let those attendees and sort of the actions are met. It's been too long that they've just been sitting there and they haven't been realized yet.
I like what you said, stomaching it. That's a really good kind of idea or sentiment.
I've attempted to try to read, but it's a hard read. But I do want to sort of give acknowledgement and hear those voices. It's a really, I don't know how Claire did it and that committee, listening to all those people that had to go through that. Have had comments like people are, I think it's good that people are waking up, like you said, Sean, and really realizing that this, the truth is there. The truth, there's evidence to that truth, and we just need to own it now, because we can't move reconciliation forward without that ownership as non-Indigenous people.
Yeah, absolutely. And the narratives of Indigenous people are being heard as well, because there was at a point where people who want to express may not be right in the right comfort zone. So, they have to just protect their mental health for just some sake of time. It's not that, they don't want to speak out. It's just like, with all that's being like, that's happening, it's a lot to take within the mind, and just going out to talk about it just as if it was just a normal conversation. It's not easy. And like little things like social media, how people are trying to educate themselves, whether it's going to different pages or looking at different trends as well. I know, like for myself, when all this started to happen, I just wanted to make sure that I was looking at credible sources, just to make sure that I wasn't really getting myself into trouble where I'm learning about fake news or news that isn't really incomplete, because that's really the debacle, the battle really, of like, are you getting the right information? And it's not just from like Indigenous people. I mean, just a whole racialized minorities as well, So I do think it's important that Indigenous voices who have their own narratives do have the time to, just fall back and let their emotions just get intact. And that way, they can really speak out for what's really happening. And the residential school incident has just been one of the main talking points. But for anyone who doesn't know, there's a historical context as well. Like just within Canada, this goes back like centuries back. And it's not just residential schools. It could be just ownership of land as well. That's another issue. I remember I did an interview a couple months back, and it was based off a treaty disagreement with a nation or a tribe. And it was basically saying you cannot go hunting during around this time. Like little things like that gets in disputes with the governments, and not even the governments, even the churches. That goes even further back. So those are the things that also occur. But it's like at a point, these separate topics or discussions, they kind of just come and go. It's not really wrapped up into like, oh, let's not just talk about this, let's talk about other things as well. And the sad truth is that it doesn't withstand enough conversation to like have like significant change. And like that's where we have to question ourselves, like what do we do more in order to not just address it, because awareness is important, but we want to see action as well and accountability upon the government's part.
We at the Gord, Downie, and Chanie Wenjack Fund, we actually just released pledge 215pledge.ca, and that's part of it. Like, so people are angry, they want justice, so we're trying to channel the anger and the emotions into actually taking action. It was created by one of our board of directors, Dr. Alika LaFontaine, who was on our DWF live session this week, and it's pretty great just to hear him speak and why he's creating safe spaces in the medical world as well, which is really cool. And then we also have a bunch of resources online if anyone wants to further get more resources and more education. We actually provide free toolkits to teachers throughout Canada that include copies of The Secret Path, a reconciliation guidebook, because like you're saying, once you understand and you have the education, it's time to take action, but you need the education piece first before you can take real action. So we provide free resources to teachers throughout Canada, and clubs and groups now and universities can sign up as well. And even if you're just like a community member and you want to learn more, the resources are free online. We're trying to gather resources from everywhere so you can look up different subjects and really delve into, like, because once you start learning about, Canada's true history, there's a lot to unpackage, and the education is ongoing. Even for us, we're constantly learning how to navigate real reconciliation.
Yeah. So if you go to the DWF website and then you click on our work, you go to legacy schools, there's you'll be able to see like resources, and you can go there and there's so many resources. I'm thinking of the education piece, and something I'm thinking of that's kind of a catalyst to movements being made, to have all of the residential school sites searched or anything. Like, I did post something at the beginning, a few days, I think it was maybe the Monday or Tuesday after the discovery had happened the week before. And I know someone commented like, these schools were good for Indigenous children, like at least they got a free education. And I think something that needs to happen is people just need to wake up. I think there's this idea that because the government is like the governing body over Canada, that anything they do would be right for its people. But as we can see with like the fact that, children were buried and not documented, and that most of the cases of deaths, which are over 4,100 that are documented, like the cause of their death hasn't even been cited. And the people that were most likely responsible have never been have never been in the court system or never been really in trouble for what they did. Like, there's a lot of issues there, but I think there's a lot of ignorance, and there's a lot of people who have said, like Indigenous people, well, even when I say I'm Indigenous, they're like, oh, well, you must get free education and all this stuff. But no, like a lot of Indigenous people can't get status because the government has made it difficult for an Indigenous person to get status unless you have all the paperwork and you like are completely full as an Indigenous person. It's very difficult to get status or to get funding for anything. But what's really interesting in general is when people judge Indigenous people or say like, well, you get free education, so stop complaining. Well, I'm sorry, but like 215 children were discovered, and those children were taken from their families. And to think of the trauma of, if you're a parent or anything, like if a person you love is taken from you, like the trauma that would ensue. And Indigenous people deserve everything they get. And the truth is, a lot of Indigenous people still get nothing from the government, and the government is still trying to fight Indigenous people to give them their land back. Like my First Nation has been in a dispute for over 7 years. It's probably going to go on for another 7 years. The Parliament buildings are on our ancestors' lands. Like there's so much trauma there, and Indigenous people deserve justice for all of the things that have been done to us in the past. And people deserve, people should understand, because of all that trauma, like we should get back everything that was stolen. That's land back.
Yes. And like you even like said it well beautifully, Rebecca, how when it comes to like paperwork and everything, like there it becomes difficult. You would assume that an Indigenous person would have like free accessibility to like the stuff that is necessary just for like a substantial living, but that the government has found so many ways to restrict that access or that pathway, whether it's like employment as well. That's another issue. And like I see it in a way because again it goes back to history. There's like this nationalistic view, how like it's like this is what we want an individual to be viewed, and like it could even be said as like the white man persona, kind of just, if you're going to get employment, it doesn't really matter based on skills. It's like if you're not having the proper like paperwork or the certain qualifications, then again, it becomes much more difficult. You have to find more pathways and more opportunities. But again, there's just more restrictions and roadblocks that are being placed, and like that is something that needs to be addressed, and there needs to be justice towards too, just as a whole overall. So Rebecca, like I totally agree like on your standpoint, and like something needs to change. It really does.
Yeah, something big.
I think the education piece really is something like, I think with the education piece, I think once people really, really understand and know that you can't ignore it anymore. And I think that is going to be the change. And I think it's just going to take a long time. Like some of the prophecies will say, it's going to be 7 generations, because this is such a deep cut that's going to take a long, long time to heal. But it's really imperative that people really understand even like the languages and the local community, local Indigenous communities to where you are. They're very different throughout Canada. And yeah, and the systematic barriers that still exist today, like you both touched on, are super important to break down and try to figure out how we can make everything more accessible for everyone. I mean, clean drinking water shouldn't be an issue for anyone. It's a human right.
Yeah, that makes no, like, that's still, I think of that and I'm like, that makes no sense whatsoever.
No,
How
like
much money?
yeah, it's like stuff like that. You would assume that like
Yeah.
there wouldn't be no problems, and it's just like, again, like all these personal agendas like that just kind of get tied in what we're trying to like. And like it's not even to say that Indigenous people are trying to be like these authoritative figures against the government. Like like they've tried to talk about this in a peaceful manner, but it becomes to a point where like, how much do we have to say until like you really hear us? And if you do hear us, like you're probably going to view us no other different. You're still going to view us the same, even if you hear what we're trying to say to you. So it's mind boggling how like this is just the personification between both sides, the both parties. And like it's crazy how it would just stretch for such a long period of time. And another thing too, and like this just really got to me. And I even talked about this when it was what was happening last year with the Black Lives Matter movement. And because of the pandemic, of everything that's happening, us having to be on lockdown, shutting the city down, I feel that a lot of issues like this, whether it's with Indigenous people, with Muslim people, Black people as well, these issues are now being like projectify even like louder than before. And I feel that because of the pandemic, because really at a point we had nothing to do and we were just in the house and all we could do is watch the news and listen. I think that opened a lot of people's like eyes and mindset. Is like, wow, I didn't know this was happening, when truthfully this has been happening before. But is it because that you have nothing else, or your priorities aren't as high as before pre-pandemic, that you're now actually listening and you're actually paying attention to what's going on?
I think it can be really hard to engage in a conversation about something that is extremely traumatic. And I think a lot of people, there's a lot of people have the choice to turn off or turn on, whether they're engaged or not. But like you said, Sean, yeah, the ability to kind of turn it off or on is kind of skewed when almost everything on social media, which is one of the only in the news, which is the two main things we're consuming, is about these issues that are traumatic. Like there's not really a turn off as much as there was before. That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So I do want to talk about National Indigenous History Month, and I know this is a very important month. And I want to ask you, Rebecca, is there like any way you celebrate it? Because I don't want this episode to be just negative. I do want to talk about all like the positive and like celebrate the heritage as well. So like I just want to get your take on that.
Well, honestly, like I guess I've been struggling to celebrate, to be honest, which I don't want to like bring this down or anything, but I have been struggling to celebrate because my identity is complex as an Indigenous person. I'm not just Indigenous, like I'm also Irish. And I was raised knowing I was Algonquin. But, due to colonization and at some point, one of my grandmothers moving off the reserve into town where, being Indigenous would have gotten you most likely like hurt. My family lost ties to our Indigenous culture. So in the last like 5 to 7 years, I've been getting my roots back. I've been like trying to dig them in and understand. But when something like this happens, like residential schools, and I come from a place that's like a little bit detached from my culture, you almost feel like an imposter to your indigeneity because you don't have direct access. So it's another reason too, like I haven't been super vocal is because I want to make sure that those that do have that direct experience of intergenerational trauma are able to voice what they go through. But as I guess at this point, what I have been doing to kind of cope with this news and kind of that kind of idea of like imposter syndrome and trying to realize like, no, I am Indigenous, like I deserve a right to sort of at least help or shed light on the voices that need to be heard. I've been swimming, so it's really cold, but I love to swim. And I would say like when I heard about the children, I kind of thought about how that my number one thought and what I've been ruminating on is the fact that a lot of them were taken from their families or maybe were even sent to the school. And their parents might have thought it was a good thing, but obviously it wasn't. And I think that a lot of them went to the school and they were ripped away from their community and they might have never had a chance to do what they love for the first time. So tap into your inner child and what's something you love you don't do anymore that you took for granted. I love swimming, but I haven't been home in a long time. I've been like at university or living in Toronto, and now I'm in my homelands, like Algonquin territory. And so I'm back at the river and I can swim in the river and I can think of these children and honor those that maybe never got to swim for the last time or do the last thing they wanted to do by swimming. So that's sort of been my way of coping and like celebrating, all that energy and all of those lives that once like walked with us and are now in the spirit world. That's been my way of kind of learning from these children to not take for granted small things and to make sure I'm living my life to the fullest and to also make sure that I'm thinking of my ancestors and the fight that they went through to make sure that I can still be here.
Oh, that's really beautiful. That's really beautiful. And honestly, I don't think something like this should be restricted to just a month. Like this should be like an everyday thing. And honestly, like the fact that when we have stuff like this and it's like it's talked for a month, and then once the day like literally ends, like that last day of the month, it's like we just head back to normalcy and we just kind of forget what we just celebrated for like within the span of 4 weeks. And it just hits hard at home where it just like that's how people can just again turn it on and off really quickly. And it's just like what causes that? Is it because like I don't know, like it's something I really can't explain, and I don't know if that's just a philosophic type of perspective that I can't really comprehend. But I think Indigenous History Month shouldn't just be just like a month. Like if it has to be a month that people can educate and understand more, fine, but it should be celebrated every day because there are Indigenous people who are still waiting the government to like acknowledge the wrongs and be accountable for everything that they've done within the past. So it's like an uphill battle for them every single day, but it's only 1 month of the 12 within the entire year that everyone else kind of just gets informed and just knows what's going on. So I think within that, like I speak for this not just for Indigenous people, like Black History Month too. You know, it shouldn't just be a 1 month thing. It should be an everyday thing as well. You know, because again, it's really the white man's burden. Like every single month, every single day, that's just kind of how it's been. And if people find that to be too radical, or it's just an idealistic type of view from what I'm saying, I mean, I'm just speaking from my mind and what I've seen and just what history has said as well. This is just like opinionated. This is just what has been written in the history books as well.
One of the things I think I love about working with the Gord, Downie and Chanie Wenjack Fund is it is encouraged to not just be a month. We highlight, like this month, we're highlighting like 3 regions in Canada with different Indigenous like culture and perspective and voices. And then we're going to do a final like episode that wraps up the month. But then we also like every month and every week and every day, we're like learn more, do more, you know, infuse all curriculum, not just, you know, a social sciences or a history class, with Indigenous perspective and knowledge and local knowledge, like resources that are from Indigenous perspective and communities. And, you know, if you are a non-Indigenous teacher, ask people to help you, ask people to come in who are Indigenous or who can share those teachings and that perspective. Because there's support out there. And that's one thing I love about working with Rebecca and the DWF team, is that we're here to support teachers and people who are just starting on this journey of reconciliation, because it's scary, right? Like there's a lot of people, there's a lot of guilt, and you need to address it and then own it and then learn and get educated. So we do have some events coming up that are going to be really cool. Like we're focusing on James Bay on June 16th, June 23rd, and it's talking to survivors, chiefs, like a whole bunch of different people. Artists will be sharing their culture and knowledge. So there is going to be some really beautiful moments during these specials. So I encourage everyone to tune into them on DownieWenjack.ca's socials. It'll be really cool. And then, and we, like I said, if you sign up for our newsletter, you'll see that we go beyond just this month, and just like June 21st, there is a lot of things going on throughout the year, because we don't want it to end. This is just it's just ongoing. Like even Orange Shirt Day, yeah, that's one day. And then we actually have a secret pack week where we honor Gord, Downie and Chanie Wenjack actually died within a week of each other. So we honor their legacies throughout that week by telling Canadians and people in Canada to do something, take action, do something.
Yeah, and for anyone who doesn't know, Chanie Wenjack was one of, I think you can correct me, Lisa, too, but he was the first like residential school child to be there was an inquiry into his death. He was actually the first child where an inquiry was done, and that is what inspired Gord Downie to create like the Gord Downie and Chanie Wenjack Fund.
Yeah, so Gord Downie was the lead singer of the Tragically Hip, the big huge Canadian band, and he actually called out Canadians to do something during that last tour in 2016. And he called out the Prime Minister. He believed in the Prime Minister to really do something to move reconciliation forward, to fix the rights, to fix the wrongs, you know. And like Rebecca said, Chanie Wenjack was the first residential school child to have an inquiry into his death in 1969. There's a whole article about the lonely death of Chanie Wenjack, and it talks about like people in Kenora knowing that something was wrong at that residential school, because children were running away every day. And I think because Chanie ran away, there was an inquest into his death, because his body was found along the CPR railroad tracks, and the OPP was called. So I think it might have been a different story if he hadn't run away. They may not known about how he died, because he could have been one of those children that that are still unaccounted for on residential school properties. So he had the strength to try to get home. It was over 600 kilometers away that he was trying to run to. And if you read the article, it's also pretty touching, because his friends who ran away with him, when asked during the inquiry, would you run away again? And like, these are children talking about their friend who had just died, And they said yes, they would run away again. And children don't run away from schools if it's not that bad.
Yeah, but I'm glad you guys took the time to like just explain like the project that you're doing and everything that you have been contributing as well, and how you're not just focusing on 1 month. So I appreciate that. And Miss Prinn, I know you mentioned about Orange Shirt Day, and I know that was a huge thing back at Downsview. I know I was like there, I was participating, and like again, it's these little things that shouldn't be taken for granted or just be used to justify a conversation that is still ongoing. I feel like this is something that we should try to educate and adopt. And I mean, change, and I know for everyone, change doesn't come easy. And it's okay if you're not that informed of what's happening, because that's what the information is there, is to help you learn and understand. Yeah. I know at first, like, if you ask me, like, grade 11 Sean wouldn't know that much. And, I would be afraid to have conversations like these because I would just kind of been in the background, listening, just trying to understand. And I'm still trying to learn today. I'm still trying to get a grasp of everything because it's so much to take in. And it's not just from the historical context, but hearing people's narrative, indigenous narratives, and the stories that they want to be heard as well. And the government are still trying to find ways to restrict their voices to be heard. So it's like, it's so much to take in, but at the same time, we need to do better rather than just what just happened the last couple of weeks and saying, oh, this has happened, we need to understand. Well, don't just try to understand this situation. Go back and try to learn more and like understand why has it been going on for, I want to say like 400, 500 years, like far back. Like, I don't know how long it's gone. Again, that's how much I'm going in. Just when you think you're done, there's more pages to uncover and to learn as well. So I just appreciate what you two are doing with the project you're doing, with the work that you're contributing, everything that you're trying to just do as a whole. And that's what I try to do with my podcast. I try to give a platform to people who are doing these types of like initiatives and these types of like goals and want to like just make the community or address a certain issue better. That's what my podcast wants to be. I just want to have these open conversations, but also promote positive messages as well. So again, I really appreciate you two for just being on here.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, to touch on that too, I think like a lot of teachers, like you had an Orange Shirt Day in high school. A lot of your teachers did not know about residential schools at all. I mean, they ran until 1996. So there is a lot of people that are like, who were learning about history of Canada to become history teachers, and it was kept out while these schools were still running. So there's a struggle with a lot of teachers to try to, like, how do they teach something that was kept from them? And that's really why we're here to offer that support, like you're saying, because we are all on this journey. Like, a lot of youth like you are way better educated than some of us still are. Like, you've got the information. The youth are really where the change is going to be. So it's awesome to see you doing this and spreading like information and education. It's really awesome.
Working for like the Gord, Downie, Chanie, Wenjack Fund, I've only been here, I think I'm going on my third month, I think. I'm not, time's gone by. I feel like I've been here a while in a good way. But something I think it's really important to note too is just the focus of the organization is to sort of improve relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. So it can be really hard as an Indigenous person when someone does come to you. Sometimes if they want knowledge on something, it can actually be triggering because your family or you have personal experience that they don't even know about. And you might feel like that's super sad. So I think it's important for like non-Indigenous people to respect that at this time, but also for Indigenous people to try not to be mad at these people if they're trying to understand, as long as they're respectful. And something I think I wanted to give a shout out to, because I know a lot of people are struggling right now, especially like Indigenous communities. And there's a lot of initiatives that I've even been a part of lately. Like, I forgot to mention, I guess something I've done to celebrate. I'm I'm also a singer, like a professional singer, songwriter, guitarist, but I'm also a multidisciplinary artist. And I just did a performance piece for, there's like a Two-Spirit cabaret for Buddies in Bad Times that will be premiering on June 24th. So like this weekend, I made the video for that. And there's a lot of initiatives for youth. So I would just encourage any Indigenous youth who are struggling to try find outlets. There's a lot of opportunities online, especially since COVID, in order for people to channel their creativity or whatever they're good at and show the world. And if that can be a way of coping, like I would just highly suggest that for youth. It's just something I wanted to put out there because I know the suicide rate for youth is really high in Indigenous communities, and because of what's happened in the pandemic, it's risen. So I just think it's, or it will probably rise. So it's important to, note opportunities for youth. You can do it.
On that note, can I also say that the Downie Wenjack Fund, we actually have a new youth ambassador program. So if you're between the ages of 16 and 25, you can apply. It'll run part-time during the month of August. And it'll be actually like a lot of really cool like education pieces when it comes to Indigenous education and perspective. It's for non-Indigenous and Indigenous youth to get involved. And we're actually going to be paying you $1,000 at the end of the course. And there'll be guests like Patrick Hunter is going to be doing a painting workshop, and Tanya Talaga is going to be doing a session on using her Indigenous voice in the communications field. And it's going to be really cool. So if anyone's interested, we are taking applications till June 18th.
It's going to be amazing.
Yeah, this is great how you guys are just having all these different opportunities. So everyone who's listening right now, there's really, I'm not going to say there's no excuse, but like there it is, like all these different things. And like I love how you guys are focusing on the youth as well, because like they are the next generation, and I feel they have the most to like benefit from this, because we're living in a time where I think we're experiencing almost every day something's happening. Something crazy is happening. It's having such a huge impact, and it's not just a time where we can just sit around and do nothing. This is a time, and again, it's within your own discretion. If you don't feel comfortable, that's like, I'm not going to be that action guy, because like I kind of just want to stay reserved and just understand that's okay. And like what Rebecca said, if you want to express like your feelings and how you're just coping with everything that's going on, you can. Or if you want to take action and do something, having like these little opportunities, like, the youth ambassador program as well, like that's a start. It's really just knowing what mind and what capacity that you're at. So that way you can make any significant change to all these different topics and all these different issues as a whole.
It all adds up.
Yeah. So, yeah, absolutely. So I think that's everything we've covered today. I mean, I don't know if you guys have like any last remarks you want to say.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
It's great to talk about.
Yeah, it's such an emotional and hard topic, but it's such an important one. And I really encourage like teachers or youth, like talk about this and make sure the change will come from us talking, right? Openingly about this. So it is really hot. Yeah, it was great being here, and I threw some links into the chat too, so you can check out some of the initiatives we're doing.
Yeah, perfect. So thank you to Ms. Prinn, Lisa. Thank you to Rebecca for being on the Safe Room podcast. Guys, I will put all the information down. I know there was so much, so I'm gonna have to cover back with you two after this, but I will put all the information down. You guys can check out the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Anchor. I drop every Friday at 12 o'clock. Thank you guys for just being on this with me. I won't lie. And like, I'm a guy that likes to be very outgoing, and I have the most utmost confidence in myself. Guys, I was really nervous about this because I didn't know how it was going to go. I didn't think it was going to go for this long. I was kind of like, okay, let's see what happens. And I mean, we could probably go for another 15 minutes. Like, honestly, how this conversation just went. So like, I'm really glad to have you two with me. And I kind of feel more confident about myself just moving forward and just ready to learn more as a whole as well. So again, from the bottom of my heart, thank you guys for being on the episode with me.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, so thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you guys next week.